3 Soviet and Russian military radio stations have been broadcasting continuously for between 30 and 50 years. The pip, a single sharp tone at 2.8 kilohertz, repeating once per second every second without interruption. The squeaky wheel, a rotating mechanical sound, cycling every 3 seconds, consistent and unchanging for decades. A third station, designated MDZhB, transmitting a low drone with occasional voice interruptions. None of them have ever been officially explained by any Soviet or Russian authority. All 3 have been studied by signals analysts and amateur monitors for decades, generating competing theories, dead hand systems, numbers stations, ionospheric sounders, navigation aids. What no public analysis has noted: if you map the 3 transmitter sites on a geographic projection of Eurasia, they form a triangle. If you model the acoustic interference pattern produced by the 3 signals at their respective frequencies, accounting for propagation physics, atmospheric conditions, and ground interaction, the interference null point, the location where the 3 signals cancel each other to produce near silence at depth, falls on a single location. The same location within a few hundred meters, regardless of the atmospheric variables you use. It has been falling on that location for 50 years. The null point is not over open ocean. It is not over uninhabited terrain. It is over a specific geographic coordinate in the interior of the Eurasian landmass, where, as a Soviet geophysical survey documented in 1969, a biologically active structure of indeterminate nature extends from approximately 800 to 2,400 meters below the surface across a lateral extent of more than 300 kilometers. 3 radio stations, transmitting for decades, producing a silence above something that requires silence to remain still. In those days, the Soviet state kept secrets buried so deep that even their existence was classified. Today, NordVPN lets you encrypt your data and keep your digital identity hidden from anyone trying to monitor your activity online. Check the link in the pinned comment for an exclusive deal. I found this program through a radio monitoring registry I was systematizing for an institutional inventory of Soviet military communications programs. The 3 stations appeared not as 3 separate entries but as a single cross-referenced group. In the operations log of a classified geophysical monitoring program, they are designated not by their individual call signs but as nodes. Node 1, Node 2, Node 3 of a coordinated system called System Tetrahedron. System. Not 3 independent stations. A single system with 3 transmission points, coordinated from a single operations center, operating to a unified protocol. Nothing personal. 3 radio stations appearing in a geophysical monitoring log as nodes of a coordinated system. Coordinated systems with geophysical monitoring cross-references are what archivists investigate. The geometric relationship between the 3 transmitter sites was calculated by Dr. Konstantin Vereshchagin, 53 years old, from the Institute of Acoustics in Moscow, who was brought into the program in 1982, the year before the PIP station came online as the system's 3rd node. His task was to calculate the interference geometry for the 3-station configuration and verify that the null point would fall where the system designers needed it to fall. His calculation log from November 1982. The physicist's private calculation log contained a detailed entry about the null point, the foundation of the entire system.
I want to document the null point calculation before the 3rd transmitter comes online, because the calculation is the foundation of the system's design logic and should be on record independent of the operational documentation. The interference null, the spatial location where the three signals, transmitted at their specified frequencies from their specified positions, cancel each other to produce a near-zero acoustic field, is stable to within approximately 300 meters across a range of atmospheric and propagation conditions. The stability is the result of careful transmitter positioning. The three sites were selected specifically to produce a null at the target coordinates, and the frequency selection for each station was optimized to maximize null stability. I want to note what the calculation demonstrates about the system's design intention. A communication system does not require a null point. A navigation system does not produce one by design. A system designed to create a stable zone of acoustic cancellation at a specific geographic coordinate is designed for one purpose: to maintain silence at that coordinate. The null point is the function. The transmissions are the means. Whatever requires silence at the target coordinates requires it continuously, which is why the stations transmit without interruption and why the protocol for any node failure specifies emergency restoration within 12 minutes. 12 minutes is not chosen arbitrarily. 12 minutes is the threshold below which recovery is straightforward and above which the effects at the target coordinate become unpredictable. I was told what is at the target coordinates before I began the calculation. I was not told what happens at 12 minutes. I believe the people who set the threshold know, and chose not to document it in the parameters I was given.
He was not told what happens at 12 minutes. A physicist who had designed the acoustic cage, noting in his private calculation log that the critical threshold was known to the people who set it and was not shared with the people who implemented it. The third node, the PIP station, came online in January 1983. System tetrahedron reached its designed operational configuration. The geophysical monitoring data for the null point coordinate shows the effect. From January 1983, the biological activity of the structure at the target coordinates drops by approximately 67% from the two-node baseline and remains at that suppressed level for as long as all three nodes are operational. Two nodes produced partial suppression. Three nodes, producing the complete interference null, produce near total suppression. The biologist who characterized the structure at the null point coordinates was Dr. Sofia Nevskaya, 48 years old, from the Institute of Biophysics in Novosibirsk. Her assessment report, filed in 1984.
I want to provide a characterization of the target structure before describing its response to the system tetrahedron field, because the characterization is what gives the response its significance, and the response cannot be understood without it. The structure is biological in the sense that biological is used in contrast to geological. It has organizational properties, metabolic signatures, and responsive behavior that geological formations do not exhibit. It is not biological in the sense of corresponding to any organism or class of organisms I can identify in the literature. Its lateral extent, more than 300 kilometers, places it outside the scale of any organism I have reference data for. Its depth range, 800 to 2,400 meters below the surface, places it in conditions that exclude virtually all known life, and yet its metabolic activity indicators suggest active biological processes at all monitored depths. The most significant characteristic for the purpose of this report: the structure is not uniformly organized. It has layered activity, surface layers showing higher responsiveness to external stimuli, deeper layers showing lower responsiveness but higher total metabolic activity. The system tetrahedron field, as currently calibrated, effectively suppresses the surface layers, which are the layers that produce output at the surface. The signals, the behavioral effects on fauna in the region, the acoustic activity that the monitoring program was designed to contain. The deeper layers are not suppressed by the current field configuration. They are isolated from the surface layers by the suppressed surface layer acting as a buffer. The system is not suppressing the structure. It is suppressing the structure's ability to communicate with the surface. The structure, in its deeper layers, continues to function. We are suppressing its interface, not its existence.
We are suppressing its interface, not its existence. A biologist making a distinction that the program's engineers had perhaps not fully considered. The system was not containing the structure. It was containing the structure's surface expression. Below the null point, something continued to function, insulated from the surface by the suppressed upper layers, continuing whatever it was doing at 2,400 meters depth without the surface knowing about it. The system has been running since 1983. In 40 years of continuous operation, there have been 23 documented node failures. Moments when one of the 3 stations stopped transmitting for long enough to destabilize the null point geometry. The longest occurred in the autumn of 2003. The operations log entry from October 2003 is in the program file. The duty operator at the System Tetrahedron Coordination Center made a call to the Backup Operations Center at 0317.
Node 1 is down. Transmitter failure, cause being diagnosed. Null point geometry is compromised. Duration estimate? Engineering says minimum 8 minutes for diagnosis. Possible 12 to 15 for restart if the fault is what they think it is. Geophysical readings at null point? Elevation beginning. We are at 180% of baseline at 3 minutes elapsed. Protocol status: emergency restoration protocol active. All available personnel on the transmitter. If it is the fault they think, restart in 10 to 12 minutes. The 12-minute threshold. Yes, we are aware. What does the table say at 12 minutes? Partial waking of the surface layer. Recovery time after restoration: 24 to 72 hours. That is the table. The table was set in 1983. We have never reached 12 minutes. The longest previous outage was 7 minutes 11 seconds in 1997. Recovery time after that one was 19 hours. 7 minutes 40 seconds. Geophysical reading: 340% of baseline. What is happening at the null point? The monitoring stations in the 80-kilometer radius around the null point are reporting. This is from the automated wildlife monitoring network, not our sensors. Directed movement in large fauna toward the null point coordinate. Multiple species, consistent direction. Get node 1 back up. Working. 11 minutes, 20 seconds elapsed. Reading 520%, still rising. Node 1 is transmitting. Null point geometry restored. Elapsed time 11 minutes 47 seconds. Begin recovery monitoring. I want readings every 30 minutes until we return to baseline. And I want a full incident report within 6 hours. Include everything the wildlife network showed.
11 minutes 47 seconds. The longest outage in 40 years of operation. 13 seconds below the 12-minute threshold documented in the critical parameters table. The incident report filed after the 2003 outage is in the program file. The geophysical readings returned to baseline after 61 hours, longer than any previous recovery. The wildlife monitoring data showed directed movement in fauna within the 80-kilometer radius around the null point for 58 hours, following restoration of the signal. Animals moving toward the null point coordinate from multiple species for 2.5 days after the 11-minute 47-second gap had been closed. 11 minutes of geometry failure had produced 58 hours of directed movement in a radius of 80 kilometers. The response to the gap continued for more than 100 times the duration of the gap. Here's the first contradiction. The International Signals Intelligence characterization of the three stations describes them as independent Soviet and Russian military communications assets, each with its own operational history, its own equipment profile, its own transmission characteristics. The PIP began in 1983. The Squeaky Wheel has been documented since the mid-1970s. MDZhB has a history extending further back. 3 separate stations with 3 separate histories, each studied independently by signals analysts who have proposed separate explanations for each. Dead Hand Trigger, Naval Communications, Ionospheric Research Tool, 3 independent assets. The system tetrahedron operations log covers all 3 stations from 1983, when the 3-node configuration became operational, as a single coordinated system with a single operations center, a single monitoring protocol, and a single restoration priority. Maintain null point geometry at the target coordinates. 3 independent histories. 1. Operational identity. The international characterization treats the stations as separate because they were built at different times and operated on different frequencies. The operations log treats them as unified because they have always served a single function together. Here is the second contradiction. The acoustic measurements of the null point coordinate, available in open source form from decades of amateur signals monitoring and analysis, show a location where the 3 signals produce a measurable interference minimum. This is technically unsurprising. 3 radio signals transmitted from different locations will produce interference patterns including null points. The measurement is correct and the physics is standard. The geophysical monitoring data for the same coordinate in the classified program file, cross-referenced from the monitoring registry, shows a biologically active structure of continental scale directly below the acoustic null. The geophysical data and the acoustic data describe the same point from different directions. One describes the electromagnetic minimum at the surface. The other describes what is beneath the minimum. Both are real. Neither, in isolation, implies the other. Together, they imply that the electromagnetic minimum was positioned above the biological structure deliberately, and that the deliberateness required 4 decades of continuous operation to maintain. Here is the third contradiction, the document that should not exist. The 3 stations were established in different years. The Squeaky Wheel has documented transmissions from the mid-1970s, MDZhB from a similar period. The PIP from 1983. Each station has an individual establishment date, individual technical history, individual operational documentation. This chronology suggests 3 independent decisions made over a period of a decade. The system tetrahedron operations log begins in 1983, when the 3-node configuration was completed, but it contains a section on the pre-1983 period, the years when only 2 nodes were operating, that describes those years as a transitional operational phase rather than as the independent histories of 2 unrelated stations. The log's language for the pre-1983 period: 2-node reduced efficiency configuration, pending completion of 3rd node. Not 2 stations that happened to exist. 2 stations that were part of a 3-station design, operating at reduced effectiveness while the 3rd was being positioned and built. The Squeaky Wheel and MDZhB were not independent stations that were later incorporated into a system. They were designed as 2/3 of a system from their inception, operating below design capacity until the 3rd station was ready. The PIP was the completion of something that had been in progress since the 1970s. The 3 separate histories are one history with 2 chapters: the incomplete system and the complete system. The operations log's critical parameters section contains a table I have been sitting with for 2 weeks. The table specifies expected object activity levels for various durations of single-node failure. Under 12 minutes, recoverable. Surface layer activity elevation. Return to baseline achievable within 24 to 72 hours of signal restoration. 12 to 30 minutes. Partial surface layer emergence. Recovery period, days to weeks. Behavioral radius of surface effects, up to 200 kilometers. 30 to 60 minutes. Full surface layer emergence. Recovery period, weeks to months. Behavioral radius, not established. Over 60 minutes, parameters not established. No field data available. Parameters not established. No field data available. For outages above 60 minutes, the system designers in 1983 had no data. They had not observed what happens at 60 minutes, and they had not attempted to produce the observation. The threshold values for the shorter durations come from documented incidents and controlled tests. The over 60 minutes row is a blank. It is a blank because no one has crossed it, and because no one who designed the system wanted to find out what crosses it. All 3 stations are transmitting as I write this. The PIP is audible on 5,448 kilohertz. A shortwave receiver or a software-defined radio will find it. The Squeaky Wheel is similarly accessible. MDZhB operates within the UVB 76 frequency range. All 3 can be heard right now by anyone with the equipment to listen. I am going to close this file. I am going to note the radio monitoring registry cross-reference as reviewed. I am going to log my access. And then I am going to walk away. I spent some time looking for evidence of what the structure at the null point coordinates is, beyond Nevskaya's 1984 characterization. The geophysical monitoring program has been running since 1969, 15 years before system tetrahedron reached full configuration, and the monitoring data for those 15 years predates the operational file I was granted access to. What I can access begins in 1983. The 1969 to 1983 period, the period of discovery, and the construction of the first 2 nodes, is at a classification level I could not reach. The characterization I have is Nevskaya's: biological, continental scale, layered, with a surface interface that the system suppresses and a deeper structure that continues functioning below the suppressed interface. What the deeper structure is doing at 2,400 meters of depth across 300 kilometers of extent, while the surface interface has been silenced for 40 years, this is not in the accessible file. The accessible file documents the suppression. What is suppressed at its full depth is elsewhere. I thought the 3 stations were independent. 3 separate decisions, 3 separate purposes, 3 separate histories that happened to produce a geometric relationship when mapped together. I was wrong about independence. The stations are one system. They have always been one system. The individual signals are not the function. The interference pattern they produce together is the function. Remove one station from the geometry, and you do not reduce the system by 1/3. You lose the null point. You lose the silence above the structure. You lose the cage. The 2003 outage lasted 11 minutes, 47 seconds. 58 hours of directed animal movement in an 80-kilometer radius followed. The next threshold in the table is 12 minutes. No field data exists for what follows that threshold, because the threshold has not been crossed. In 40 years, 13 seconds separated the longest documented outage from the duration for which no field data exists. The 3 stations are transmitting. That is the only fact that matters right now. The pip is tapping once per second. The squeaky wheel is rotating. MDZhB is droning. The null point is maintained. The geometry holds. Whatever is below it, at 800 to 2,400 meters depth, across 300 kilometers of biological structure, with its deeper layers continuing to function below the suppressed interface, it is below the null. It is still. I am closing the folder. The stations are transmitting. Go listen if you need to verify it. They are transmitting right now.